Just did.
Just tell me when you got it. Just send me a message when you got it.
I did.
You got it. Okay, great.
Froze.
Whoa, guys. I think we should just.
So everyone seems to be static.
Oh,
should we just start?
Adam.
Yeah. Okay. You know what? Because I'm freezing, I'm going to just hang. You can hear me. Welcome, everybody. It is.
So welcome, everybody. This is we've been having a series of webinars. This is unprecedented. It has never happened before. So you'll bear with us. I think Adam has some connectivity issues that he'll be working on later on. So we're delighted to have you.
I'm back.
Yeah, you're back.
Welcome.
Dude, I think you should just
Okay, because I have this brief window of opportunity where I'm still connected. Okay. I can't see the panelists' pane, just saying. Okay, but you can see each person, I'm hoping. Okay. Presidented, as Felix has said. So I'll just introduce very quickly, because I have this brief window of opportunity, welcome you to our 4th webinar, which I'm very proud to say is brought to us by the Ubuntu Dialogues Project, which Upenyu will be hosting us today. I'm also going to drop a link, because I'm also going to be dropping a link to our actual website, because what we've done now is we've updated and we've put in our most recent recordings. So I will put a link there. So for all of you who haven't been to our webinars before or are just joining us now, will be able to access them there. So I'll add that link a little bit later, and all other information will be available there. Okay. I'm going to hand over straight to Upenyu, so I'm not breaking up. Go ahead, Upenyu. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Adam. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and thank you for joining us for this webinar. My name is Upenyu, like Adam said, and I'm with the African Studies Center at Michigan State University, where I serve as project manager for the Ubuntu Dialogues Project. The Ubuntu Dialogues Project is a partnership between the African Studies Center at Michigan State University and the Stellenbosch University Museum. It is funded by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. The partnership seeks to establish and to strengthen connections and cooperation between universities and communities here in the US, but also in South Africa and other African countries. It does so by bringing together and by engaging students, academics, professionals, and practitioners across time, space, and disciplines. Consistent with that vision, this webinar is an effort to amplify the voices, the perspectives, and the experiences of people of African descent. It features individuals with a variety of experiences engaging with African and African diaspora communities. The webinar focuses on identities, connections, and relations among people of African descent in the context of Ghana's 2019 Year of Return campaign. As part of the conversation today, the panelists and discussants will engage with the why, the how, and the where of re-establishing ties among Africans and the African diaspora. This is obviously not a subject matter that we can exhaust in a 2-hour webinar. And this is why the African Studies program at UW-Madison has organized a July 13 follow-up event to further reflect on the issues arising from today's dialogue. We will be putting the information about the Madison event in the chat box for you. I would like to end my opening remarks by introducing to you my colleague who has been gracious enough to agree to chair this session. Dr. Philip F. Young is an associate professor of theater studies at MSU. His research interests revolve around African and African diasporic societies, literatures, and cultures. Please join me in extending a very warm welcome to Dr. Philip F. Young.
Thank you for the introduction. And again, ladies and gentlemen, good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on the part of the world from which you are signing into this webinar. You are all welcome to the virtual African Diaspora Conference, which has as its overarching theme, Old and New African Diaspora Networks Before and After COVID-19. The subject we will be covering today is imagined identities, boundaries, and relations among people of African descent. 4 panelists will be presenting on this topic today. Each presenter will have 10 minutes to deliver their presentations. If you have questions during or after the presentations, we encourage you to click on the question and answer icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen and enter your questions there. You may also engage through the chat module in expressing your comments or your views about anything. Now, the questions that will be asked will be addressed at the end of the presentations, at which time we hope to engage in robust discussions. But before the questions are answered, 2 discussants for this session will be given some time to respond to and express their thoughts on some of the critical issues raised in the presentations. Our first presenter is Bridget Oto. She is a Ghanaian television journalist and media practitioner. Though she started her career at Sky TV as a reporter and news anchor, she later joined TV3, which is Ghana's multiple award-winning private television network, as a producer and presenter of a weekly feature documentary. The title of her presentation is Beyond the Year of Return, the Perspective of a Ghanaian Journalist. Over to you, Bridget.
Hi, Philip. I think I'm trying to reach Bridget right now. I don't see her here. So probably we could go on to the next one. I'm trying to follow up, see where she is at.
That's fine, no problem. We'll go on to our second presenter, who is Frederick Gooding Jr. Frederick Gooding, correct me when I destroy your name. Frederick Gooding is an associate professor of African American Studies with the Honors College at Texas Christian University in Fort Worth, Texas. Gooding critically analyzes race within mainstream media, effectively contextualizing problematic patterns based upon their historical roots. The title of his presentation is African and American, Being Doubly Conscious of Two Worlds. Over to you, Dr. Gooding.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Welcome everyone. The thing about technology is that it's great when it works, and when it doesn't, the world falls apart. But we're going to get through this, and so I appreciate everyone tuning in, as I am excited to share with you a few ideas. So the fact of the matter is here's the roadmap that I would like to use to facilitate the conversation. I would like to talk about what's in the name. I would like to talk about a gentleman you may have heard of called Du Bois, and then have some concluding thoughts about what to do. Because the fact of the matter is that when we talk about what's in the name, when we talk about identity, You heard the quite exquisite introduction, thank you, Dr. Effiong, of who I am and what I am. And that's one of the basic principles of human relationships, right? This idea of identity. When you first meet someone, you pretty much situate yourself as far as identifying where you're from, you know, physically, geographically, and also where you are from in a larger sense of, you know, where is your derivation? How are you connected to different societies and peoples on the planet? And so therefore, when I say my name is Frederick Gooding, if the conversation were to go a little bit further and people were to probe and ask me where I was really from, right? The fact of the matter is that I would likely tell people I was what? I would tell people that I am African American. Okay, that's how I identify, right? And as you see here, this is on the homepage of the university of which I'm currently employed. It says in the first line, Assistant Professor of African American Studies, right? African American, right? Okay, so the question though is, what is meant by the term, the hyphenated term African American? When we talk about the year of return, many people are embracing this idea of, well, even though I'm American, I'm of the African diaspora, and so therefore I'm going to return to my origin point, right? This idea of somewhere in the continent of Africa. But see, that's precisely the issue. The question is, but where exactly am I from? So when we talk about an imagined identity, for me to say, you know what, clearly, you know, well, I don't, you know, believe, you know, I'm European American, right? You know, at least, you know, not fully when you look at my phenotype. You know, there's no one in my family who speaks French or practices any of the cultural practices. You know, we identify as being of the African diaspora, right? But the fact of the matter is that, okay, so we have that check mark as far as that part of the world, the 7 continents. So we'll choose Africa as far as, you know, coming from there. But where exactly am I from, right? Is it East Africa, right? When I walk the streets of Washington, D.C., many people, you know, think I'm from Ethiopia. Is it from South Africa of where I've been? Is it from West Africa of where I've been? Is it from, you know, North Africa of also where I've been? These are different, distinct regions. And just like France is different from Germany, even though they're in Europe, right? Nigeria is different from Ethiopia. Kenya is different from Zimbabwe, right? So in other words, you know, these places have distinct different identities. And so this idea that I'm just from Africa, I'm an African American, I think is problematic in many respects, insofar that we have to look at the institutional barriers that ruptured any type of specific tie that I have, right, in terms of heritage. So the rupture that is created as a result of being in this country, by being African American, is as follows. As you all know, by being a Black man in America, I'm constantly wrestling with this concept of I'm free, but not equal, right? And you see that exemplified in a statute here called Emancipation. Lincoln, fully dressed, standing erect over a kneeling African-American male who's still in chains and partially clothed, right? And I won't bore you all with our dark, painful past and present that is still ongoing, but you see the lynching postcard, this idea that African-Americans have been killed openly in public in our society, right? As a reflection of what I call psi-racism, structural, cyclical, and institutional, right? And so this is nothing new. And many minds have wrestled and thought about how to go about navigating this overarching framework of psi-racism, right? One of these individuals was Dr. W.B. Du Bois. And Dr. Du Bois talked about how Black people have to see themselves through a dual lens, right? He articulated this dual lens as a double consciousness, right? Because remember what I told you, I'm African American. So the American part signifies that I was born in this country, the United States of America. I have a passport. When I travel, it says I'm from America. But at the same time, the African prefix suggests that I'm definitely not white, right? And that I have some sort of different type of derivation or origin story, right? Of which I do. You know, hailing from the diaspora, that's what I claim, right? And so Du Bois, the part that I think was most salient for us, I'll read the quote in full, is that one ever feels his two-ness, an American, a Negro, two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings, two warring ideals in one dark body, whose dogged strength alone keep it from being torn asunder, right? And at the time that he espoused his ideas, they were in quote unquote competition with another leading thought, practitioner, Booker T. Washington, who felt as if people should not pursue the talented 10th, but should cast down the buckets where they were, so to speak. So what does this mean for someone like me? Well, given the limited resources and identity constructs I have within actual society, again, it's no secret that Black history is often given short shrift and overlooked. In our textbooks, you talk about all these Confederate statues coming down. Well, the question is how many Black statues remain erected, or there's hardly anything. If you look at the movie theater, there's hardly anything that really reflects and reinforces my identity within America, right? So the question is, what do I do? Well, I was struck by the South African principle of Ubuntu, right? This idea that a person is a person because of other people. And I think if there is one flashpoint that I think has helped create community and identity in many ways that allows for the freedom of full expression, right? This idea that I don't have to switch up, who I am and what I'm doing, it actually would be through the gospel of hip hop, right? That's what I posit, right? Hip hop is actually, very organized, as many people don't really understand. Again, I'm not talking about rap music. Rap music is the commercialized, commodified version on the radio. But I'm talking about true underground hip hop, right? It's composed of 5 different elements: DJing, MCing, breakboy, or B-girl, or B-girl, breakdancing, knowledge of self, and street art or graffiti, right? And what's so phenomenal about hip hop is that it has literally marshaled the least of resources to recycle and repurpose people and places all across the planet, right? Look at this individual on a piece of cardboard, turning that into a platform for breakdancing. Check out these milk crates that have been repurposed to actually hold records for a DJ. And then when I talk about people, this is Lil Nas X, as you may recognize from that Old Town Road song, where he sampled a rock song from NXS. And, and here, fast forward after being broke and out on his luck, he's a successful Grammy winner and out of the closet living his best life, right? And so in looking at this idea of hip hop globally, it's no secret that Blacks in America got the party started, right? Blacks in America got the party started in the late 70s in New York, South Bronx specifically, right? And so when you look at playback, how songs created from the Black culture have become anthems for people all across the world. I think it's fascinating that hip hop has created a global context for identity, as far as people who understand struggle, people who understand oppression, and people who are looking to raise their voice to create a sense of larger identity. Right? And ideas being that what you saw briefly with the Toy dance there, that strikes very similar notes to what you've seen in terms of fight the power, and also in many of the movements that are taking place across the nation currently as we speak, right? And so when I talk about
1 minute, sorry to interrupt. I have about 1 minute.
Yes. And so when we talk about, in conclusion, this idea of what does identity mean, and as far as imagined reality, for me, hip hop is as wide and deep as the ocean. It knows no bounds, and it allows for full depth in the exploration of one's humanity. Because here in America, unfortunately, structurally, matters are quite limited. I want to be very clear about one thing in conclusion though. This picture that you see of me that's on the actual homepage of my university was actually taken on the western shores of Ghana. I was actually visiting one of the so-called slave castles where many of my ancestors may have begun their journey coming to America. And Du Bois, who I quoted earlier, is also buried in Ghana. He took up residence there in the final years of his life. What I want to say is that I'm very clear about my identity. I'm a Black man living in America. There's no dispute about that. I'm not confused or anything of that nature. But what I'm speaking to is this idea that I'm constantly confronted with this conundrum of not having, institutional support and clarity for who and what I am, at least within this country. And so therefore, despite those limitations, I find hip hop to be an outlet for my humanity, dignity, and respect.
Thank you so much for your very informative presentation, Frederick Gooding. I see that you address a number of salient and sometimes controversial, the salient and sometimes controversial topic of identity as it relates to being African and American, and as it relates to location, language, and even designations. It is important to note how Gooding compares this phenomenon to a term popularized by W.E.B. Du Bois, and that's double consciousness. But also very important is the fact that he also proposes certain resources. In this instance, he's looking at hip hop as a channel that can serve to bridge identities within and across Africa and the African diaspora. Again, thank you for your presentation, Dr. Gooding. Except Bridget is here, we'll go on to listen to Harry Kiru. Is Bridget Otto here by any chance? Okay.
He is not here yet, but I think she'll be joining us any moment.
Okay. Well, we'll go on to Harry Kiru's presentation. Harry is a Kenyan graduate student at the Department of African Cultural Studies at the University of Wisconsin at Madison. His scholarly interests lie in the intersections of Blackness, Africanness, and multilingualism within a diasporic context. The title of his presentation is Katikati, Leveraging the Unbelonging of the New Diaspora. Right, Harry?
All right, thank you, Philip and Openyu. As you heard, the title of my presentation is Katikati, Leveraging the Unbelonging of the New Diaspora. I recently saw a photograph on BBC News with the caption, and I quote, "A woman with her face covered by a Kenyan flag protests against George Floyd's death," end quote. The photograph features a face-off between protesters who are all kneeling except the woman in the Kenyan flag and riot police in their full combat gear. Although we cannot see her mouth, the woman is leaning forward in a way that suggests that she's saying something, maybe leading a chant, and is ready for some sort of retaliation from the police. The photograph is part of a feature story about the experience of racism encountered by a Kenyan journalist during his stay in the United States. As I look at the photograph, I'm reminded of the various alliances that we, the new diaspora, that is African immigrants, have with various marginalized groups in the United States. Our Blackness, immigration status, multilingual capacities, and history of colonial imposition are not only sites of our own oppression, but also the points of convergence with others with similar fates and trajectories. As I look at the woman leading this protest, I find myself asking this question: in what ways can the new diaspora be leveraged in the unification process between Africa and the old diaspora? The typical narratives surrounding the new diaspora oscillate between brain, brawn drain, and remittances by their countries of origin, or as a problem through the anti-immigrant rhetoric of taking away American jobs or refusal to assimilate. However, as I will argue in this brief essay, the experiences of the new diaspora in what I call unbelonging, that is a straddling of Africanness and Americanness, belonging to both and to neither at the same time, presents an underutilized resource in the Pan-African vision. My use of the Swahili word katikati, meaning in the middle or between, is to emphasize the location that the new diaspora occupy. An in-betweenness that is not static, but one in which Teju Olaniyan describes, and I quote, a liminal space, influx, congealed, full of contradictions, aporias, and dizzying chaos, end quote. The new diaspora, henceforth Katikati, not only have to learn what it means to be Black in America, a category that I will suggest is always in contention, but also what it means to be an immigrant with a history and a language and memory. I thus use the word Katikati as both a location and as a way of being for the new diaspora. I will briefly suggest 3 ways that the Katikati can be leveraged as an in-between or a go-between the continent and the diaspora. These suggestions are in no way conclusive and are based on my own experiences in my 23 years as a Katikati. So Katikati and Blackness. The Katikati are not Black when they arrive in North America. By this statement, I am not suggesting that white supremacy as a global and historical oppressive machinery is not at work on their bodies, but that the Katikati are not consciously aware of what their Blackness means within a United States context. I'm in agreement with African cultural studies scholar Handel Kashope Wright and historian and anti-racist scholar Ibrahim X. Kendi's arguments that the Katikati are interpolated into Blackness and Africanness upon their arrival into the US, and that Kenyan immigrants are homogenized into a Black racialized ethnic group. As a result of this interpolation and racialization, the Katikati have to learn what it means to be Black in America. Cultural studies and curriculum theorist Awad Ibrahim suggests that there are three phenomena that occur in the rhizomatic process of becoming Black. First, the Katikati become excellent ethnographers through observation and reflection about the various discourses surrounding US Blackness. Second, Black popular culture becomes a site of learning, both performative and linguistic ways of being Black. And lastly, the Katikati end up creating what Ibrahim calls rhizomatic identities, that is these new norms in the hybridization of cultural values from their old and new homes. This ethnographic learning is paramount in addressing what Olaniyan calls substantive frictions between Africans and the diaspora. In this case, the role of race and in particular Blackness in relation to the self and the other. Africans and the diaspora narrate themselves in very different ways. According to African diaspora scholar Michelle Wright, I quote, African immigrants narrate themselves through colonialism or post-war socioeconomic changes, end quote. And I would also contend ethnic nationalism, while the old diaspora narrate themselves through the Middle Passage and Blackness. The following story will help illustrate my point. So exactly a year ago today, on July 9, 2019, I was part of a delegation from the University of Wisconsin-Madison's African Studies program, which facilitated a discussion between the Mandela Washington Fellowship's Young African Leaders Initiative and the Nehemiah Center for Urban Leadership Development, a leading advocacy organization for African Americans in Madison. In total, there were 25 African leaders between the ages of 25 and 35 from 18 different countries, 2 Katikati and 6 old diaspora. The meeting began with an awkward moment when the CEO of Nehemiah, Dr. Alex G., in an attempt to decenter whiteness, asked the African Studies Program's associate and assistant directors, both white women, to leave. Dr. G went on to suggest that this would be a space where Blackness could be centered because what tied us together, other than our ancestry, was Blackness. What Dr. G assumed wrongly was that the diaspora and Africans narrate themselves in similar ways through Blackness. I later informed Dr. G during the Q&A session that contrary to what he thought, the African leaders, apart from the 2 South Africans, did not necessarily consider themselves to be Black or necessarily felt a particular affiliation to him based on Blackness, which was met with nods of agreement. This was a shock to him that Blackness outside the specter of whiteness, and in particular the Black racial binary in the US, was not salient, which he went on to relay in an interview with a leading news outlet on communities of color in Madison. Secondly, Katikati and the return. The Katikati as an in-betweenness of location and way of being understand what it means to be in constant displacement, both in their old and new homes. They are aware that the day they left home and the lives in it moved on, they can never go back to the same spatio-temporal home. Cultural critic Bell Hooks' words become the Katikati's reality. I quote, "At times home is nowhere. At times one only knows extreme estrangement and alienation. Then home is no longer just one place, it is locations," end quote. This displacement allows the Katikati to empathize with the old diaspora's yearning for a return to the motherland, but also understand the complications inherent in the return. In Lose Your Mother, cultural historian Saidia Hardman writes about the disillusionment she feels when she is called Obruni, a stranger, on her visit to Ghana. Her words ring true to the Katikati, and I quote, "Obruni forced me to acknowledge that I didn't belong any place. The domain of the stranger is always an elusive elsewhere," end quote. The Katikati also understand the driver behind the tourism of the return. They know that Ghana, like other African countries, depend on tourism for their economy, and it does not matter the reasons which bring the Obruni or the Mzungu, be it a reconnection with ancestry through visiting old castles or going on a safari. And lastly, the Katikati and African studies and diaspora studies. The presence of the Katikati problematizes the co-naturalized demarcation between African studies and Afro-American diaspora studies within the United States. Within African studies, the Katikati ethnographers come to learn the nuanced inner workings of the Africanist enterprise machinery, I would suggest in two ways. First, in the process of becoming racialized as Black, the Katikati begin to see how race operates as a given in African studies and how white supremacy goes unchecked. As sociocultural anthropologist Jemima Pierre contends, I quote, "It is only an epistemic blindness, a blindness that is trained, that can explain the persistent scholarly separation of slavery from colonialism," end quote. What Pierre is getting to here is a strategic intentionality of the Herskovits legacy coupled with the investments of the US government and philanthropic foundations in the post-war era in ensuring that race is not analyzed in African studies, but in diaspora studies. Second, the Katikati, particularly those in traditional white institutions, become witnesses of what historian Jan Alman calls the recolonization of Africa in the gatekeeping of knowledge production. That is what research is considered valuable and funding worthy. The Katikati are thus caught between benefiting from the Africanist enterprise, but at the same time mined like the continent and relegated to the margins since they themselves cannot be Africanists. The Gikuyu say goshera ne kohega, to travel, visit is to know, and godia ne kuana, to travel, to go is to see. These two proverbs underscore the reality that there are ways of knowing and seeing that only happen through movement. As I have suggested, the Katikati occupy a significant position, both literally and figuratively, that can be strategically utilized as a bridge between Africa and the old diaspora. This bridge is not one of gatekeeping, like the one done by the Africanist enterprise, but one of translation, in particular about the substantive frictions that keep us apart, such as the role of Blackness in the return. I began this essay by highlighting a picture of a Katikati that is protesting the killing of an old diaspora. The Katikati understand what it is to be Black in America, what it is for one's body to be marked as other with coded significations of anti-Blackness, such as thugs, dangerous, and violent. We're reminded in this picture the importance of standing up for each other because our struggles are interlinked in anti-Blackness. Although there are distinct particularities between colonial oppression and Middle Passage slavery, there are ways that the diaspora and the continent can lock arms in support of each other. And I believe that the Katikati are positioned strategically to be part of that process. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much. That was truly intriguing, Harry. And just like Frederick, you touch on identity, but from a different perspective, and you do raise important questions about a new diaspora, which occupies a very unique social position that can be an invaluable factor in uniting Africa and the old diaspora, but thus far has been underutilized. Has been an underutilized resource in the Pan-African vision. I like your use of the term Katikati, which I've said before sounds like katakata from Pidgin English in Nigeria, but means something else. I like how you use this to define the new members of the members of the new diaspora and how they straddle their Africanness and Americanness. In other words, belonging yet not belonging to both worlds. And yet, in unbelonging, this doesn't necessarily mean that they deny being Black, except that it may not be Black within the American context, but expands the context to take into consideration how this identity is defined by other factors beyond the repressive factors that define its portrayal within American society. Again, thank you so much. We know that, or we expect people to share their comments and questions, and that would give you room to expand more, you and of course other presenters to expand more on your presentations. I hear that Bridget Otto is here, am I right? Hi, Bridget, can you unmute yourself?
Yes.
Okay, welcome, Bridget. Since you were supposed to present first, I'm going to allow you to present before Njiakai. And Bridget, I had already introduced you to
Yeah.
And since you're here, she's a Ghanaian television journalist, media practitioner. She started off in Sky TV, and now she's with TV3, which is an award-winning private television network, where she's producer and presenter of a weekly feature documentary. And the title of her presentation is Beyond the Year of Return, the Perspective of an Ghanaian Journalist. So over to you, Bridget.
Right, thank you very much. And I'll need the support of Upenyu, who has my slides with him. So Upenyu, if you could upload it so we can start. And apologies, I think the time that was communicated is quite different from what I had. So, all right, so Upenyu, if we could, yeah.
Felix, do you want to share the slides, Bridget, the slides?
Yes, yes, absolutely. So beyond the year of return, the perspective of a Ghanaian journalist, and I was thinking about, what is the perception of African Americans? How do Ghanaians also perceive African Americans? So I thought, year 2020, perhaps we have a different perception. And when I went online to do my research, I realized that the perception is as old as it was maybe sometime in 1980s. And I picked a couple of comments online that I wanted to share with you. So if we could put the slides up and then we can all have a look at it. I'll just read just a couple of them. Right. And do Africans have iPhones? To protect the identity of the people, I decided to just black that out. Do Africans have iPhones? Okay, so I think the screen is loading. Right, thank you very much. All right, so move to slide 7 and look at, do Africans have iPhones? Does Disney know Black Americans think Africans can't afford iPhones and still live in huts and don't wear clothes or even speak English, or think we don't have clean water through the entire continent? So these are comments that was posted recently when Black is King was launched online by Beyonce. And this is as, what, 6th July? So those are some of the comments that came in, and I wouldn't want to go through all of them, but just to give you an idea of what people perceive Africans, or what people, African Americans especially, perceive Africans. And yet, on the flip side, people in Ghana revere African Americans. In fact, if you're in Ghana, you're more considered Obroni, not even by way of looks, but by way of sound. People listen to your accent and they assume you're Obroni. And it's a term that is used actually respectfully, not disrespectfully, but rather respectfully. So if we could go to slide 7, please. Yeah, okay. So can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, so Samuel L. Jackson was one of the stars who came to Ghana for the year of return. And on his journey, he was on a personal journey, homecoming, and he was on an, I think, documenting, enslaved documentary. And one of the things Samuel L. Jackson did was to document his own personal journey by posting pictures that I thought were fascinating, and yet he received a backlash. And if you can see from the next slide, the photos that Samuel L. Jackson posted of regular people on the streets of Accra, Jamestown, it's a fishing area, so Jamestown, and I thought pictures were fascinating, and yet he received backlash. And this blogger, on the next slide, he's called Ameyo Deborah. He's one of the top bloggers in Ghana. And he decided to engage Samuel L. Jackson to find out, why he's posting these photos. And Samuel L. Jackson simply responded by saying he's taking photos of what fascinates him. But Ameyo Deborah held a different perspective. He thought this is only feeding into the already tired narrative of poor African, dirty, disease-ridden Africans. And he simply said that is what fascinated him, and he left it at that. But why was this interaction important? It was important because this is a Hollywood star, a very powerful man who is in Ghana on his own personal journey, I must say. and decided to post a picture. I did not have a problem with it, but it only speaks to the fact that a lot of people are tired and frustrated on hearing, the constant denigrating of Africans, even though I don't think he was denigrating them, but that is just the mindset, how people perceive African Americans, or how they think African Americans perceive Africans or Ghanaians in particular. So that is why it was important that this interaction took place. In the end, Samuel L. Jackson did not grant the interview, but it ended at that. The year of return stars, who came in? Okay, so we had Tina Knowles, we have Boris Kodjo, we had Naomi Campbell, we had quite a number of them. And according to statistics from the year of return secretariats, we had over 750,000 visitors, mostly from the UK and the US. If we can go to the next two slides, please. I think I'm speaking faster than the slides, so thank you. Please kindly go to the next, to the stars. The next one, please. All right, so these are the statistics that came from the year of return secretariat, that the arrivals in Ghana rose to some 750,000, which was like 200,000 more than we had the previous year, mainly from the UK and the US, and it went up by some 24%. And the biggest selling newspaper in Ghana, the Daily Graphic, reported that Ghana had generated some $1.9 billion from that interaction alone. Now, that figure was also challenged by experts who thought it was a bit inflated. And my question is this: if a government is willing to inflate its figures just to show that this amount of money was injected in the Ghanaian economy, it tells you that they are interested in what happens in the diaspora. The diaspora means a lot to Ghana, that the diaspora helps our economy as well to thrive. And that's how come they had to even just inflate the figures just so they can say it was a successful event. But beyond the numbers, people really want the stars who come in to have a bit more interaction with the locals. So they engage them and get to know, what they really, really want. Not at the national level, not just with government interaction, at the Flagstaff House or at dinners and tea parties, but getting to the locals, interacting with them, and having a feel of, what everyday life is like in Ghana, and perhaps they will be encouraged to come in. Now, another person who made an interesting visit to Ghana was Steve Harvey. Now, when Steve Harvey came to Ghana, if we can go to the next slide, please. On the year of return stars, please, thank you. So when Steve Harvey came to Ghana, he went to the Elmina Castle, and he posted a very powerful tweet, and that's the next two slides, please. And he simply said this, and I quote, "This was real pain I felt going back to Ghana's slave castles. I could feel my ancestors on me, powerful beyond words that I can explain." Hashtag the year of return. Now, why was this important? It was important because when he posted this, a lot of Ghanaians could not relate. They felt it was a bit distant. In fact, there were people who said massa, massa, massa. And when locals say massa, 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 they're literally telling you that you're not telling us the truth. I mean, how can you feel your ancestors? It tells you that people don't even recognize how grave it is, the experiences of African Americans, people who live through police brutality, racial profiling every single day. And that's how come I made a point earlier that it's important to have them be present, interact with locals, educate us, so diaspora can have a very good relationship with Ghanaians in Ghana through forums, through programs, and a lot of these things could help them to get their message across through interaction and Q&As and many others that would help us really connect well with those in the diaspora. So we keep saying the year of return, beyond the year of return. The next slide, please. Beyond the year of return, diasporans should come home. To what exactly? Now, if you're in the diaspora, you want to come home, you want to perhaps move your business to Ghana, maybe think of permanent stay or relocation of your investments in Ghana. You probably want political stability. You want your business to thrive in an environment devoid of violence. That's the next slide, please. An environment devoid of violence, security of your businesses. Some even want right to vote. All of that, I can confidently say that can be guaranteed in Ghana. but we want to see the same, you know, elsewhere on the continent. Perhaps you could be like Dr. Obadele Kabun and his family. He moved in Ghana back in 2008, and they have been here since. He escaped racism after he was constantly harassed by police in the US. So who knows, this could be your story. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bridget Oto. I think that was a very, very frank and down-to-earth discussion about how Ghanaians and ultimately Africans view African Americans and vice versa, and how we are in many ways reflected by predominant images of our societies. Sometimes these perceptions are defined by stereotypes, but you have also raised the important question of how greater unanimity can be achieved between the various worlds, the various cultures. I think your presentation is timely, since your country, Ghana, continues to make deliberate and comprehensive strides in encouraging greater Ghanaian and African diasporic ties. The question, of course, is what are the implications of this Back to Africa initiative? Again, thank you so much for your presentation. And move on now to the presentation by our last presenter, Njia Kai. Njia Kai currently serves in various capacities as director, producer, senior consultant, programming and production consultant, and performing arts manager for many initiatives, mostly in the Detroit area. She has just completed her 13th year as director of the African World Festival, which is a 3-day cultural arts extravaganza presented by C.H. Wright Museum of African American History in Detroit, Michigan. The title of her presentation is The Role of Cultural Arts in Connecting and Unifying People of African Descent. Thank you. I think you need to unmute, Njia. Right.
All right, thank you for this opportunity to share my thoughts as part of this important conference. My remarks are based on the assumption that we all agree that a fundamental unity amongst African people on the continent and throughout the diaspora is essential to our survival and continued development. How do we achieve unity amongst a widely diverse and fragmented people who have been purposefully separated for many centuries? And for those of us who have been designated by the African Union as the 6th region, the diaspora, how do we identify and find our way home? Defining the cultural arts as inclusive of those works of literature, visual arts, dance, music, film, and theater that are grounded in our ethnic customs and values, I contend that the cultural arts have and continue to play an effective role in connecting and unifying people of African descent. Research has confirmed that arts and culture can bridge diverse groups, connect generations, and stem from unifying traditions that highlight shared identity and connect us to the place where that identity is rooted. Presented by the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History, the annual African World Festival has been held in Detroit, Michigan each 3rd weekend of August for the past 37 years. Association with this strong institution has been integral to the festival's longevity. Detroit's Wright Museum for 51 years remained the world's largest institution dedicated to our history and culture until the 2016 opening of the National Museum in Washington, D.C. As the museum's largest public outreach event and Detroit's largest largest annual ethnic festival, The African World Festival, which is abbreviated as AWF in this paper, attracts an audience of more than 150,000 attendees from across the region and the globe to celebrate the richness and worldwide influence of African culture through stage performances, visual arts, folk life and technology exhibitions, scholarly presentations, and film screenings, plus 200 marketplace and food vendor booths. AWF is an annual family reunion for thousands in Detroit and is a much anticipated pilgrimage for out-of-state and international attendees. For example, each year, an ex-Detroiter schedules her vacation time to attend the festival, flying all the way across North America from the state of Hawaii. There are several Midwest communities that organize chartered buses to attend the festival, coming from cities that most often do not have an African or African American history museum or such a major cultural event. AWF invites and attracts the attendance and participation of African and Caribbean officials, ambassadors and ministers of culture who are often interested to present and promote to our eager audiences. The festival offers an open and exciting destination for the general public, both for the culturally aware and for the culturally curious. Admission is free, though a nominal fee may be added in 2021, and all are welcomed. Festival visitors tend to reflect the population statistics of the city of Detroit, with more than 80% appearing to be Black and the remaining 20% to include all other races. In Detroit, Black is a term that is most generally used to refer to all people with total or partial ancestry from any of the Black racial groups of Africa and the world. Though we are often viewed as this monolithic Black, we know that our people represent all points on the scales of politics, economics, and national or cultural identity. The festival distinguishes the different languages, styles of dress, foods, customs, and religious practices brought together for 3 12-hour days of shared community. The event staff focuses on strategic programming and a festival footprint that stimulates formal and informal introductions, business networking, and relationship building between the many interests gathered. We are especially and intentionally inclusive with participation, exhibition, sales, and presentations by various points of view. We focus on presenting a broad view into the African world and on creating a positive, family-oriented environment, catering to our wide-ranging audience of children, teens, young adults, mature adults, and seniors. We include emerging talents, local professionals, and invited national and international guest presenters and performers selected to attract and impact these varying demographics. Most of the festival activities take place outdoors on the streets and surrounding green spaces of the Wright Museum. Inside the museum, historical exhibitions, cultural arts workshops, and various presentations by academics and community leaders are presented. The museum remains open to visitors for the full festival weekend, offering guided tours and allowing self-guided exploration. In my 13 years as festival director, producer, and programmer, I have intentionally viewed the African World Festival weekend as a not-to-be-missed opportunity to progress our cultural imperatives of liberation, freedom, and unity. AWF is an amazing gathering, presenting a very unique and favorable circumstance for impressing the consciousness of so many towards cultural understanding and connection. We contract with Black companies for as many of the needed technical and support services as they are prepared to handle. We work to fill the program with international talent and traditions, not just African American performers or intellectuals. Most often, the realities of the festival budget dictate the balance between local and headline performances. But fortunately, Detroit is an international city with large communities of African and other diasporans. Festival themes are chosen to enliven historic movement slogans and quotes from prominent leaders. We select 3 ancestral icons to focus on in educational installations and main stage presentations. Examples include the Honorable Marcus Garvey, Miriam Makeba, Nina Simone, Fela, Bob Marley, and Gil Scott-Heron. We open each day of African World Festival with the pouring of libations. Main stage hosts with their varying accents and home languages announce the program and engage with the audience in reflection of the respect we've shown across cultures to speak on our collective work and shared responsibilities that made the event possible, and to emphasize the cooperative economics generated over another festival weekend. We break the ice that may exist between us with laughter, entertainment, food, and fellowship. We demonstrate our civility and humanity and educate each other about our histories and innovations. 150,000 very diverse festival goers, and the audience continues to grow. 150 volunteers and 100 event staff and crew are connected with hundreds more merchants, scholars, performers, and artists, representing Africa's scattered descendants. For one weekend, we breathe the air of unity. Of course, there remain tensions and contradictions. Building camaraderie and maintaining cooperation around the theme of One Africa is not without its challenges. Whose traditions should dominate? Is the trust there to pool financial and other resources? Who should direct the event? Is funding available to sustain and expand the festival's reach? Are we able to find accord or compromise within the national and religious positions we hold? Have we worked to establish relationships during the time between the annual festivals? Are the Black Americans to really be considered Africans? These questions stem from and are affected by the same forces our nations and populations must grapple with, wherever they reside. It would be foolish to suggest a weekend festival could bring resolution to such large and entrenched concerns. What I propose, however, is that the arts, especially those intentionally crafted to cultivate meaningful exchange, play their part to build and secure connections across historical divides of geography, ethnicity, social class, so on. Many years ago, I attended the 9th FESPACO, the Festival of Pan-African Cinema and Television of Ouagadougou, held in Burkina Faso. The 13 of us, mostly attached to Howard University, were then the largest delegation of Black American filmmakers to attend the biennial event. As we did not represent a government or governmental department, nor an independent nation, our delegation took the bold step to forward a letter requesting some level of official recognition by FESPACO's Pan-African Filmmakers Federation. In that effort, I came face to face with the ambiguities of my nationality. The African World Festival reflects other such successful efforts over many decades and across the globe to establish safe spaces to reacquaint our people and to reignite our common purpose. Frantz Fanon has famously stated, each generation must discover its mission, fulfill it or betray it in relative obscurity. We seek to more directly pass on a lighted torch.
Thank you so much, Njia. Before I go ahead and say what I need to say next, can we just acknowledge these panelists for their amazing presentations? I don't know how we do that in Zoom. Do we click fingers? Do we smile at them, clap? I don't know. Send them a credit card or something, I don't know. Anyway, thank you so much. This was beautiful and very enlightening and enriching. I think it is fitting that we ended with Njia's presentation because it brings together everything that has been talked about. It not just reinforces the importance of unity, but she shares her participation in programs, practical programs that actually celebrate and facilitate unity. She doesn't just underscore the importance of art and culture as separate paradigms, but of the importance of merging both into what she refers to as cultural arts, which becomes, like I've said, a practical means to bringing together Africans as well as Africans as well as Africans and African descendants. And she has gone on to explain, she goes into detail about the programs that she's involved in. And one of the things I like about this is the diversity of the subjects that are addressed in these programs. It's not just dance, music, and song. It's also food, it's also arts, it's also crafts, excuse me, it's also healthcare, it's also film, it's also spirituality when she talks about the libations, for instance. So thank you very much, Njia. Like I had said, we do have about an hour right now for comments and questions and answers and discussions. But like I said earlier on, before we go into this segment, we would first like to listen to reactions or responses to the presentations from two discussants for this panel. Each discussant may speak for about 10 minutes, I believe. And the first of these discussants is Shingi Mavima, who is a graduate of the African American and African Studies Department at Michigan State University and an assistant professor in the history department at the University of Toledo. Over to you, Shingi, and remember to unmute your mic.
Indeed. Thank you, Dr. F. Young, and thank you to our four dynamic presenters today. Really just mind blown. So I will try go through, maybe spend a few seconds on each and see what big ideas came out for me and areas of intersection. So to Dr. Gooding Jr., mind blown, like I said. One of the big things that you spoke about that I thought may be worth interrogation, well, there's two big ideas that I wanna bring up, two or three. The first one being this idea of the uncertainty surrounding exact place of origin on the continent, and to the extent that I wonder how much that particular detail matters, especially when you put it in conversation with Bridget's presentation, where she showed Steve Harvey feeling emotional, and feeling like he was home in this space. Yet, he might as well be from a different part of Africa. Whether that sentimentality, it evokes this idea of what we call fictive kinship, that's been brought up by different scholars, and whether that is as important as stand-in for these ties in place of sort of this very exact place of where the African diaspora, members of the African diaspora originate from. After all, that is also what a lot of, say, European ideals have been founded on, right? Where this idea of Western civilization that people just buy into, even if they're not from those very specific spaces. They're not from Greece, but they champion Greek and Roman ideals. So I wondered how important that is. Then I also want to talk a little bit about this idea of hip hop you brought up. And I just thought it was fascinating because even in this moment, this George Floyd moment, people have looked to hip hop figures for sort of a lead on at least to be a prominent voice as far as these things go. So I was wondering whether you felt that had applicability across the diaspora as hip hop, or maybe spiritually as hip hop. By that I mean, in South Africa, for example, we might point to Kwaito being the vehicle that a lot of this resistance was channeled through. Sure, it bears some similarities to hip hop, but South African hip hop also exists as something else, but Kwaito is the main one. Whereas in Zimbabwe, the same thing, there's a genre called Zim dancehall that is more, seems to be the voice of the streets in the way that hip hop here is. So, just interested in that conversation. Moving on to Harry. Woo! Again, just an incredible presentation. I like the way you spoke about the Katikati, and especially putting it in conversation with the idea of double consciousness as well, right? So almost, what is that double consciousness? Maybe even triple, right? If we talk about, you add to that. I was wondering if there was a flip side of that for the continent. By that I mean, we saw that with this George Floyd moment, and the lady you showed from Kenya, and even on the continent, there was a lot of energy, right, that rose up in protest of this. And I know I've been thinking, and this is something that I've been thinking about even prior to this, what is the equivalent energy that the continent can feed off of from the diaspora that will incite change, right? In the very same week, I believe, that George Floyd was killed, a gentleman, Collins, I forget his last name, a Xhosa gentleman was shot down in South Africa for having a beer, during lockdown in his backyard. And the conversation there really harkened back to this idea of the South African Defense Forces are remnants of the apartheid system, right? So there's a need for deconstruction, much in the same way that is needed here too. And that's South Africa we're talking about, even in places where there is no overt hand of whiteness, right? In other spaces, you still see these tensions, and several communities were even castigated for their hypocrisy in condemning the George Floyd murder, when at home we barely have a voice to speak up against some of the tyranny that we are facing in our own governments. How can we leverage that? Again, tying back to what Bridget was saying, because we're going to need the sort of democratic structures if we're going to open up these spaces. So that's something else that I thought we could think about in that regard. Bridget, really loved your presentation as well, and I'm almost glad that you came in a bit later, because the way it dovetailed with the earlier presentation showed that there was no, it just tied together, and without actively building off of each other. I was wondering about this idea that you brought up, particularly around Samuel L. Jackson, and just your views on that, because I've always thought that, well, Samuel made all the sense to me. Even when I go to Europe or Australia, I don't take pictures at the Burger King, because that's the stuff we have here. I take the things that look different to me, which is, I understand his thinking with that. So, and also, more importantly, I think those lives, whether it's the village or the ghetto, as we call it in Zimbabwe, those are very important African stories as well that deserve to be told with dignity. And I think when we romanticize and try to, all right, sounds good. When we try to move away from that. So I just want to hear your thoughts on that. Then finally to Njia, big fan of the festival. I've even performed there a couple of years ago. There's a question that has come up in the community that I just want to ask, which is, there is a 4th of July African celebration that happens in Detroit. And this is very African. This is, continental Africans and immigrants. And it seems to be something else altogether. And some folks have wondered if there's a schism between that and the festival. So I don't know if you've read about that. So I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts about that. So indeed.
Thank you so much, Shingi. I noticed you asked a number of questions. What I'd like to do is still go ahead and listen to Professor Ampofo, and maybe those questions you probably have them written down somewhere. Maybe you'll ask them again when we get back to that in this session. So our next discussant is Akosua Ampofo, who is a professor of African and Gender Studies at the University of Ghana, and is also president of the African Studies Association. Over to you, Professor.
Thank you very much, Philip. And let me add to that last piece of introduction, African Studies Association of Africa. This is very important for issues of identity. And I am on the board of the African Studies Association of the US, but I'm very proud of my role in the African Studies Association of Africa. And we're talking about identity. Thank you all for the invitation, and greetings to my friends over there that I know. The presentations have been interesting, heartwarming, alerting, and I couldn't possibly do justice to what we've been given. But there are some threads that I would like to pull out and put on the table. So definitely the issue of identity came up, and I'll say a few things in general, then I'll try and say something on each of the presentations. So the issue of identity, the complications of the intersection, the issue of where one is really from, and how you get that, ask that question, and who asks it of you. And of course, that troublesome issue of race. We all know that race is not real, and yet race is real. In our experience of it in this moment that we are living, race is so real. The issue of the diaspora, and what does it mean to be African, and Blackness. What does Blackness mean? And I think that Harry, Gia, and Frederick made important contributions to this whole conversation about African and Blackness and identity and the complications thereof, but also the tensions and how that is fraught. Important also, because I think this is where we want to conclude, and Gia did that very well for us, is issues of survival. What's happening with us. When Du Bois talks about the souls of Black folk, our souls are hurting. Where are we going from here in this moment? Are we just surviving and overcoming, or can we find, within all these complications, can we find some unity so that we actually, we are winning the struggle? And clearly the story of the arts is central to that, because our stories as Black people have been truncated, and the arts and the festivals and music are important in what a friend of mine, Ajwa Beidou, says, in untethering that story, so that we're not just curating the story and putting it in a museum, but we are untethering it so that it gives us life. So some comments on Frederick's paper that I really enjoyed. I mean, that question about where you're really from, even those of us who are not in the diaspora, we get asked that question a lot, depending on where you are. But I also sense it means something else depending on how you locate your Blackness, where it comes from. And in conversations with young Black men in Africa and in the diaspora, and this is something that I'm working on, looking at Black masculinities. When I talk to Ghanaian young men in Philadelphia, for example, and their dealings with their fears and their anxieties about race, one thing that they say is, you know what, when it gets too bad, I can get out of here. I can say that I'm going back to Ghana. And this is not something that the African in the diaspora, because your home is Philly. And so you can't just hop off and go to Ghana. And then the complication about the hyphenated person. I'm thinking of Du Bois, I'm thinking of Baldwin, I'm thinking of Fanon when he talks about black skin, white mask. Sometimes people hyphenate us, and sometimes we hyphenate ourselves. And I believe that part of our survival and overcoming is, even when we do hyphenate ourselves, we need to do the hyphenating. I have to decide how I want to hyphenate myself. Somebody should not determine for me who I am. And finally, just to say a couple of things about hip life. As I was listening to you, Frederick, I was thinking of the work of Misha Clark. I'm sure you're familiar with the hip hop in Africa, Prophets of the City and Dusty Foot Philosophers. And what I find fascinating in her work, and which you alluded to, and I'm sure that if you had more time, you'd speak a lot more to that, is the ways in which the hip hop artists are doing some of that connecting across these fraught lines of tension of Africans in different places. And sometimes they don't even have to travel because you don't need to be physically in the studio together anymore to do a recording. So you have somebody in Tanzania and somebody in New York and the other one in San Francisco. And I put that on the table in as much as Angie has also said this as a pathway for our tomorrow. Quickly, some comments on Harry's paper and presentation and on the new diaspora. I really liked this concept of Katikati, and I will have to talk to you more about borrowing it. In an introduction to African studies class that we teach, we showed pictures of different people. There's Obama, there's, and I'm blanking out on his name, the Zambian vice president who was white, and then we have Africans, second gen and third gen, you know, a different mix of people, and we ask them who's an African. And it's very interesting to hear the responses about who gets to legitimately ascribe Africanness to themselves. And it's so fraught. But language is a very important aspect of that. And I'll make a quick sidestep to Bridget's comment about the term Obroni, which she felt was not a slur, but I think it's a lot more complicated than that. Sometimes the term Obroni in Ghana is about just a description about a white person or somebody who is an other, who doesn't speak the language, who's different, who's a foreigner. Sometimes it is used towards people who we expect to speak the language, who we expect to know better, who do not display that consciousness. And then it's like, as for you, this Obroni. In other words, for our context, you're not Ghanaian enough, you're not Black enough. And I think the complications around that, or the complexity are, Harry brought that out in a very real way that, you know, I could so well connect to. And it's also, and you know, in this moment that we are in, the deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Olawale Salua, and it's reminding us that a bullet doesn't know an African from an African American, from a Haitian, from a Caribbean, from a Jamaican. We are Black people, and we are in this together. We need to remind ourselves of that. And it comes to that conversation that Bonjia and Bridget referred to, but also how do we receive people from the diaspora? So we've got the year of return, but at the same time that we are asking African Americans to come home, and Ghanaians were holding a vigil in Accra on behalf of George Floyd and other killed Africans, which I attended. The police came there to disperse us. So, you know, on one hand, we're saying, yay, guys, come. On another hand, we are employing the police in the same way that they have been employed in other places. And this is something that we really need to globally respond to. Quick comments on Bridget and back to the year of return, which, you know, on the face of it looks great. She didn't have enough time to speak to it in great detail. I'd like to hear more of your thoughts about this, Bridget, because there have been disappointments about, I think, from Africans in the diaspora, that it sounds very mercenary, if I can put it brutally. There's an interest in your money. You know, come invest in us. We like the celebrities. We like you to invest. But, you know, where are we in the conversation about understanding the pain and being in the same space with Africans in the diaspora? Does it go beyond that? You know, and I think that the example of Samuel L. Jackson speaks very clearly to the tensions. I would sit in the camp of those who are who are a bit uncomfortable with the images, and I won't go into great detail with that, but I think it feeds into the poverty tourism that often comes from people in the West. And since I only have 1 minute, maybe by now 58 seconds, just some comments on Njia's presentation that I also thoroughly enjoyed, you know, principally because of the power of the arts. this is where our story is. This is where we can do stuff. This is where we can find the hope and the love and the faith and the Ubuntu that was referred to. This is where we can do it together. We don't necessarily need to speak the same linguistic language, but we are able to, to make those connections within the arts. And the questions that she asked about whose traditions, the funding, which again alludes back to this whole year of return thing, and what does it mean about nationality? And as much as race is not real, there is a certain Black nationality conversation that we need to have, and I'd like to end on that note by putting it on the table. Thank you very much.
Philip, could you unmute yourself? You haven't unmuted yet.
Okay.
Okay, great.
Okay, it stopped. I didn't do that time, so maybe there's some glitch somewhere. But anyway, I was just saying thank you, Akosua, for your comments. And just like Shingi, you've raised a number of questions, and we can get back to those questions later on. What I'd like to do now is hear from people, hear a couple of voices that we haven't yet heard from yet. And there are two questions here. Because they're related, I'm going to ask them, and they're for two different presenters. One is for Frederick and one is for Harry, but they both address the issue of double consciousness. This question is from Clara Viltoft. I think that's how you pronounce the name. And the question is for Frederick. How do you think double consciousness manifests in contemporary US for Black Americans, African Americans, newly arrived Americans, and or multinational children? So that's Frederick. Should I ask again?
Yeah, no, I heard it. You okay. Answered it now. Yeah. So I think that the question is constantly ongoing, right? Because I think, at least in the United States of America, we're talking about a white dominated supremacist society, fact. And it's been ongoing for 400 years and counting. Just because we change the name or the face in the Aunt Jemima Pancakes box doesn't mean that we've necessarily achieved, resource equality, right? And so what we have to be careful of, just really briefly, is this idea of the cycles of oppression. Remember, it's not as if, remember party people, what was happening in January, right? January of this year, life was ongoing. Things were normal, even though they were very much racially problematic. Now, all of a sudden, we're waking up and saying, oh, well, maybe, the Washington Redskins should change their team. Well, it was fine in January. So in other words, we must be mindful of the concept of interest convergence, meaning that whenever, there's enough pressure, usually financial in nature, that is when white actors have motivation and incentive to act. So this idea that, we're finally turning the corner, who knows? Time will truly tell that answer. But I say all that to say that this constant negotiation is ongoing for those who don't identify as white, but most especially for African Americans. Because again, even just listening to the different presentations, I'm stimulated because even the term Katikati, I'm somewhat jealous of that term. Why? It's Kiswahili. Kiswahili comes from a specific place. That's the whole point. So where do I go? If I'm going to get on a plane today and say, fuck this shit, excuse my French, where do I go? I think it is important. Now, I appreciate Shangi's comments, but I have colleagues from Ireland, Australia, who could trace back to the 16th century, the ancestors. There's strength and power in knowing where you come from, right? I mean, the idea is that, I'm not born on the island. I am connected to somebody and something somewhere. Understanding that is so very important. That's why we talk about in hip hop circles, this idea of knowledge of self. due to knowledge. So once we understand and educate ourselves that our history did not necessarily start in 1619 when the good Jolly Roger arrived in Jamestown, Virginia, this idea that we are connected to a larger history. Black people have been doing phenomenal things for centuries, right? For centuries, right? I mean, I'm not just talking about the pyramids of Egypt. I'm talking about, all over the continent, right? And so to understand that, I think, again, we talk about the comments working with the brothers in Philadelphia, straightens the back a little bit. This idea that I'm not limited to this limited narrative that is being spoon-fed to me here in America. So I say all this to say that the conversation is constantly ongoing so long as the power structure is in place here. And I view, finally, hip hop as what my colleague Najia was saying, as that cultural bridge. This idea that hip hop is very inclusive, it is very much open. It is founded upon this idea of keeping it real, right? Being authentic to oneself and being able to make that connection and speak to it very powerfully, especially when it comes to contemporary ideas. As Chuck D called it, it is the Black CNN. If you really want to know what's going on, whether on the streets, like you said, the Zim dance or the Kwaito, then you need to listen to the music of the people. And that's how we remain connected, even though I'm still in search of this question.
Thank you so much, Frederick. And the other question is related to that. This question is for you, Harry. For the African immigrant, is Katikati similar to the state of double consciousness experienced by Blacks in the US? How are these experiences alike and how might they differ? And this question is from Alice Traore.
I think double consciousness is definitely, applicable. But even as Dr. Ampofo brought up, that and part of what I look into my work through folks like Awad Ibrahim is that there's definitely when our bodies as immigrants are come into a space that is racialized in particular ways, like in the U.S. The U.S. Dominant Blackness doesn't take into account our language use or immigration, and so there are ways that double consciousness, yes, works in terms of how that two-ness. But there are ways Fanon talks about this triply part of it, where we're responsible not only for our body, but our race, but also our ancestors. And so even like one of the conversations that that Bridget brought up is how Africa is seen, or the representations of Africa become important to us when we're in the U.S. So because we're concerned about how is Africa talked about, how is so there are ways in which we inhabit this very interesting space. So I think double consciousness is important in as a gateway of understanding. But I think also, as Dr. Ampofo said, ultimately, even though I've lived here for almost 24 years, I can pick up with my Kenyan passport and move back to Kenya. So there are ways that it applies, but also not as much. It's useful, I guess, in some cases. So yeah.
All right, thank you. Since there are several questions for several presenters from one of the discussants, Shingi, I'll refer to some of them so that we can hear from some of the presenters what they think about some of these issues. And if you're listening, Shingi, if I don't phrase your question well, help me out, okay? But this one is for Bridget. How do we reconcile the quote unquote marketable stereotype bending portrayal of Africa with the need to celebrate the diversity of African stories? Unmute.
Okay, all right. I'm saying that question also fits into what Professor Adumako mentioned about, the Samuel L. Jackson story, for instance. I particularly was not, against those photos that Samuel L. Jackson, but the comments from the blogger is so real. Like, it's a lot of people's reality. People are just tired of seeing those. But again, we must tell those stories because they are real. They are part of us. It is not all of it. It is only a part of us. As in, when you go to New York, you have places that are dirty. Likewise, if you come to Ghana, there are places that are very clean, that have beautiful buildings. And a lot of people will say, why didn't you go to the airport? Why didn't you go to Airport City? Why didn't you go to this place? Of course, you cannot tell somebody, who uses his own money to fly all the way to Ghana, where to go, where not to go. But it matters because he's not just anybody. This is somebody who can add to shape the narrative. And it's important, what those people say about us. And somebody, especially when you see yourself in the person, and in this case, I'm referring to color, because when you see the person, a bit of you say, he's just like us, he looks just like me. And so he must understand, he must move away from the tired narrative of dirty, of disease-ridden. Yes, there has to be like a balance to it. I believe that was the intention behind it. There should be a balance to that story. There's already enough PR that has sold Africa in a way that a lot of people who are on the continent themselves are upset about, and they want to change those narratives. So in 2020, we're only asking that there should be a balance in the way we tell our story. If the UNHCR, if the United Nations videos aren't going to do it for us, perhaps we should be the driving force for that. And that's why I'm happy, when you have social media and you see some of these ignorant comments about the continent, I mean, we're quick to jump on them and correct them. And I also want to just quickly, talk about what Professor Adumaku made reference to about the vigil. Government held a memorial in honor of George Floyd. And same night, there was a protest also to say justice for George Floyd. Those people were not numbered up to 100. They observed the protocol, they had their masks on, they were working within the law, but somehow government sent military to go and disrupt them. In fact, the leader of the group was arrested. I think he was put on 150,000 bail. For what exactly, nobody knows. So there's a certain obsession, this is in response to Professor Adumaku's comment. There's a certain obsession by our government, to present this front of, like excessive investment in PR than on the ground, being real and presenting the story as is. So they have this hand to show to the foreigners and that hand for the Ghanaian who is living every day through this environment. And I believe until we see a certain sincerity and also recognition of the pain that African Americans go through or have gone through, I mean, you wouldn't see comments that, when Steve Harvey posted his photos, the comments from Ghanaians were heartbreaking, I must say. You could tell they were ignorant, they cannot sort of identify with what he's saying because they haven't lived his reality. And that's what we need to go beyond just being interested in the investment, just come in, put your money in us, but care about the person, make the room and have them be more comfortable, not just their money, they're not just, money machines. Be interested in their story, and government has to do more, set up systems that work, that would go beyond just investment, but more about understanding them, understanding their realities. And then the locals can connect with them on that level. And then you will see a better relationship and partnership, especially with the locals. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. I'm going to ask you two questions, Njia, because they're related to your projects. One is from Joy Williams and the other is still from Shingi. And the first question, have you found a schism between the African immigrants and the African American community in celebrating the festival? Is there a difference, I guess, in the response or in the excitement towards the World Africa Festival when it comes to African immigrants and African Americans? I think that's the question.
I would answer this in two ways. One is just a direct response as it relates to the festival that we hold, and then I would like to answer it more of on the concept and philosophy that I try to operate under. So Shingi mentioned the fact that the there are organizations of continental African people who are our neighbors and residents here in the city of Detroit, who do hold a July 4th gathering in a park, and it is a big gathering, 5,000 plus people, and they separate into their various national or cultural groupings, and there's food and there's music and there's vendors and all of that as relating to these various groupings, and you can move through the park and just experience a great taste of Africa. Many of those people come the next month and are involved with and attend the African World Festival. Many do not. Many of us in the African American community, especially amongst those who are considered part of the cultural community, do attend a July event. And we have exchange throughout the year. So just as much as there are those of us whose minds are closed, whose ignorance shows, or whose lack of access and opportunity exposes tensions and contradictions, there are also those of us who have circumvented all of that and have crossed over that divide and operate together. I wanted to mention, you know, sometimes I tend to get real frustrated, and I had to be told that I was an idealist, and I didn't think I was. I thought I was the practical one with the, you know, looking at, hey, this is simple, let's just get to this point. But there is a template that has been used by those who control the world and who especially control the quote unquote Black world for thousands of years. The template just keeps being repeated. And it's mind-blowing how successful it remains. That even as we have researched it, and there are books and philosophers and committed activists for hundreds, thousands of years now who have explained to us our situation, we still, for the majority of us as a group, we're still mired in it. That template is so successful. Every time you push on one end, the other end grabs you and pulls you back. And so yes, contradictions, misunderstandings, the shame of our impoverished lives, and yet the celebration of the beauty and innovations we make within that poverty, all of that exists at the same time. And one of my mentors used to say, can't we just have 360 degrees of Blackness? Does it have to be just one point on that circle? Can we allow and engage with each other? Can we find some levels of similarity, some point of agreement that we can at least do one little thing so that we establish that potential? And for me, that's the African World Festival. I pour a lot of energy into that because it does example us. It's and there are other festivals in America that I know of, and festivals that have been held in other places that do the same thing, that create that temporary space that for a few minutes is Black land, or whatever word we're willing to agree on. It's our space, and we're free to be us in it. And we can dare to cross those lines and actually allow and accept each other. So, you know, there's lastly, I would say that I believe that for the African, quote unquote, American, who has to fight every day for the rights of a citizenship that are supposed to be part of that American part, we have no land of ours. We have no land, and that's one of the major identity issues. It's really that orphan feeling of having no land mass, no specific people that you can bust through slavery with to reestablish your greatness, unless you're willing, like me, just to go there and don't care. Yeah. The other thing is that we don't have a name. It blows my mind that all these decades later, we are still grappling with what we shall call ourselves and continue to take on names that are grafted onto us. And the point of culture. You know, with the African World Festival, I've had people ask me, well, what is the culture of African Americans? Like, other than soul food and basketball and music, what do you all got? And so these are major points that establish a people and establish their value. And we just keep grappling with them.
You're muted.
Am I?
I was hearing her.
Oh. Just to say that we keep grappling with them because we are caught up in the mire of someone else's plot to control. And we have not just dropped them and start to focus on ourselves exclusively.
Thank you. And can you, someone, Joy Williams, like I'd mentioned earlier, has a question here. You mentioned the 6th region. I think Joy just wants some clarity on that. You know, she says, how is this progressing? That's the question she poses.
Yeah, there's a good friend of mine, Sister Erna, who lives in Ghana. She was a teacher here in the school system, and she purposefully traveled to Africa over many years, took on extra jobs, saved her money, and now has repatriated to Ghana. She was one of the first people to get her citizenship there. And she has built a compound and is inviting African Americans and others from the diaspora to come and land there with her so she can help them find their way into that country or others. So she is very active with the African Union and the whole 6th region initiative. And so it has starts and stops. And it is, you know, those who are really working on it and engaged in it see it as a thing, and other people wonder sometimes, as I said before, you know, are Black Americans really Africans? You know, are African Americans really that?
Right, thank you. There was a question on hip hop, and I'm looking for that question. For whatever reason, I can't find it. So what I'll just do is go back to another question that was asked here. And this is directed to Harry. It goes back to Pan-Africanism, because you had mentioned that the new diaspora is strategically positioned to advance the Pan-Africanist vision. And this question is, how can we leverage the Pan-Africanism of this moment for the uplift of the continent?
I like what one of the things that Njia mentioned is that got me thinking is that we're always going to speak from our perspective, from our positioning. And so what allows the Katikati and by the way, Frederick, part of using the word Katikati is because I'm tired of looking for English words to try and figure out, you know, ways of being that, you know, cannot be captured in those. So, you know, you just find the words that might be able to capture that. So for the Katikati in this case, as part of that is trying to see, you know, as the late Tejo Lanyon would say, that there are some substantive and non-substantive issues that on some level the Katikati are able to see that you know, could be on some level resolved, but that because we're operating from different histories, from you know, how we come to be in even these spaces becomes tricky. So in terms of a Pan-African vision, you know, again, as a budding theorist, my job is to try and imagine a world in which we can all come together. As to the practical bits of it, those will always be very tricky. And oh my goodness, Frank Wilderson in you know, the Afro-pessimist says, you know, you always just need to look at the people on the ground. How are the people on the ground living this thing out? And then, yes, we see how we can make it work across the board. So yeah, that would be my 2 cents in it.
All right, thank you. I do see the question here. This is an interesting question for you, Frederick. And this is about hip hop. And the question is from Felix Mutunga. Felix Mutunga says, currently one of the most vibrant societies that has embraced the movement is Chinese society, yet they seem to have embraced the music and not the ideals behind it. What do you think about the way hip hop is and has been embraced in China? For instance, the overwhelming silence of the Chinese hip hop artists about the Black Lives Matter movement has been criticized. What does one make sense out of it in terms of identity? That's for you, Frederick.
So I appreciate the global contextualization. And let me just say this, right? Going back to what my colleague Njia Kai was saying about arts serving as a cultural bridge, I think that when we talk about hip hop, I maintain that it is indeed very much doing this, universally and globally as far as connecting people. And so in terms of hip hop starting off in America, again, it didn't start in the beaches of Malibu. It started off in the ghettos by the forgotten, the forlorn, the long lost, those who didn't necessarily have a language, right? And so we're looking to create one, this idea that I exist, I'm here, I have my dignity, and I demand respect, right? This whole ethos that grew. It was so very powerful that it transmitted worldwide. Many people criticized it when it first came out in the early 80s. People like Tipper Gore, remember that whole advisory on your albums? Well, we don't have albums anymore, but those advisories was created in response to hip hop, right? This idea that, hip hop was so pernicious, it was going to pervade the young minds and corrupt society. Well, many decades later and billions of dollars later, we see that hip hop is here to stay. Corporate actors are using hip hop as a way to leverage their messages. So what does that mean? What this means for China is this, that it is rumored that some of the best breakdancers have never left the borders of China, right? In terms of people incorporating hip hop culture and infusing it and practicing it and imitating it, right? And emulating it. And again, China's not the only one. You're talking about all over the world, people have emulated and tried to take it in and adapt it to what it is their own. Like in Germany, they don't necessarily have the race issue that we have, but they'll talk about their disaffection and poverty and things of this nature, right? But here's the thing. I agree that what may be lost in translation are the nuances of everything I just stated, right? This idea that hip hop has come from a very specific place, from a very specific group of people, right? And so, we must understand that hip hop is in constant conversation and dialogue against these destructive supremacist forces that invalidate the humanity of Black and brown people, right? And so by being birthed in this context and being situated here, the idea is that when it goes out across the world, that may be lost in translation. And so, here's what we need to balance. On one level, it is encouraging to see that many people are embracing and are open to this new idea of expression. At the same time, you're right that that people are not, they're embracing the practices of hip hop and not necessarily embracing the principles from which it stood for. Well, maybe that's the context for additional conversation, right? Additional dialogue and education. Because I think what is positive is this idea that here I am looking outside, looking in, and all I know is I don't understand every word. I don't understand every syllable and the meaning and the nuance. I mean, hell, even just American English and slang is hard to understand for those who are born native, English speakers. But what I do understand is that I see these people, they're moving in a way, they're operating in such a way, visually, it is arresting, it is capturing my attention, it is stimulating my imagination. In other words, I feel power. I may not understand exactly from whence that power comes. I may not be able to harness it fully and translate for myself, but I understand that these people have power. And that is precisely the point of hip hop.
Thank you so much, Frederick. There's a question here from Adeolu Oyekon, and I think it's inspired by Bridget's presentation, but I also think anybody who wants to can answer this question. It is about this whole Back to Ghana, Back to Africa initiative. And the question is, how does this intersect with class? Samuel Jackson was able to visit because he has the means. At what point does the experience of a poor African American intersect or diverge from that of his or her quote unquote successful counterpart? I guess the question is, how can people take advantage of such initiatives when they don't have the means to take advantage of such initiatives? And like I said, I think this was inspired by Bridget's presentation, but either Bridget or anybody can comment on this.
May I?
Go ahead.
I think it's a very powerful question. And I don't even think that those who thought about this whole year of return thought about the fact that there are poor people in America. I think they were probably not even factored in, because if you look at the group of people or the class of people who made it to Ghana, there are people who are well off. And you can tell from the events that were organized, the kind of people who showed up, the kind of struggle, even local celebrities, what they had to go through to meet such people. So perhaps the initiators, the thinkers, I don't think they even factor that in, but I think that's a very powerful question. That unless the person wants to go on a journey of discovering, you know, having that feeling that Steve Harvey had when he went into the castle, thinking that this door of no return, anybody who went through this door went through it reluctantly, they never returned, and they probably don't even know where they even ended up. I think that's the whole point. I don't think they even thought about that, because they assume that if you're in America, perhaps you're well off, you're wealthy, you can afford the tickets. They don't know that there are people, perhaps they do know, but they didn't really factor them in, that they know there are people who also struggle, just as people struggle here in Ghana to make it, to get tickets, to travel and say, look, I want to have this experience, I want to have this feeling. So I don't think that was even part of the whole marketing of Year of Return. Thank you.
Thank you.
May I chime in to say that a lot of times I don't think we really recognize how very similar we are, and that the results of colonization and enslavement have affected all of us pretty much in the same way. So when I went to FESPACO, for instance, I raised money to go. My family contributed. And right before I left, it was my birthday. My friends gave me a little going away party, and I took up a collection so I could bring some money to Ouagadougou with me. And I had $50 that was collected at this party. I was really ashamed of my friends for not being more generous, but I took the money, and when I got there, we happened to have an audience with President Sankara. And I presented that $50. They took a picture, put it on the front of the newspaper, and $50 US at that time was 250,000 CFAs. So I had young people following me on the road asking me, could I take them back to to America with me, because they saw me as a wealthy person. The majority of people who I know who have traveled to Africa over the years from here in Detroit have been working class people for the most part, because those with more finances were going to Paris and Italy and wherever other European spots that were seen as sophisticated. And the traveling to Africa was spurred a lot by those progressive and cultural folks who had to work hard to get that money to go. So sometimes I recognize that we are caught in a lot of misperceptions, and we don't always recognize how much our situations are so similar because the same person is spinning that top. And, you know, this is another area that we can gain some understanding and get a little closer, I think, when we do exchange.
Thank you, Njia. We have about 4 minutes left. I'm imagining we'll probably go 5 or 10 minutes over, if that's okay. But I think at this point, I'd like to ask just one more question, and it's a question from Akosua. Unfortunately, we won't be able to get through every question. People have been exchanging comments and ideas in the chat, so that's good. You can also read some of those comments. They're also quite enlightening. But here's a question from Akosua. What do all the presenters feel about curating stories through art, music, theater, film, etc. for the next generation? Who would do this and how? So, and you don't have to go into details. You can just summarize your thoughts. I know this is loaded, but again, who do all the presenters feel, what do all the presenters feel about curating stories through art, music, theater, film? In a sense, Njia is already doing that, but let this be our final question. And since it's directed at every presenter.
I can say something a little. So I utilize storytelling in through my research. So because there's something just powerful in being able to say, hey, here are my experiences. Here's how I have been able to see the world. Here are the gaps that I see that, you know, either don't account for my experience and all of that. And so so in fact, my master's thesis was pretty much just 6 stories in this way, and then some sort of analysis of what does it mean to be an immigrant, to speak, you know, 4 languages, and to be Black in America. What does it mean also to be male? What does it mean to also raise 2 boys who are, you know, American, but they also don't know what that means yet. So and so I think storytelling is very important because it does capture something, and it goes beyond it goes outside of, you know, academic jargon and all of that. So yeah, so that's how my work is aligned with storytelling.
Anyone else? Otherwise we can just move on.
I'll just throw in quickly that there are a lot of initiatives that are recording stories, that are making documentaries, that a lot of independently published books. So again, it's our issue about having a central authority, a central organization, you know, for us to be able to pull that together, but not just, I'm not saying not just for African Americans, but within the folks that I know from the continent and the diaspora. This is happening in a lot of spaces. We just need to, I guess, use some medium by which to centralize access.
And Njia, I'll take that softball and swing my bat and say that one of those mediums, ladies and gentlemen, is hip hop. I just dropped in the chat 2 videos. It would be very fascinating for you all to check out. Fight the Power by Public Enemy. Originally came out with the song in 1992. They just did a rematch of it in 2020 in honor of the George Floyd protests. And I think that it's an excellent way to, even though we're loosely organized in that sense, to document our changes over time, you know, to see how we're dressing, how we're speaking, what we're talking about. So again, I think hip hop is a very valuable resource that is worthy of further study.
Can you share the link?
Yes, ma'am. I've just put it into all panelists on the bottom in the chat. So,
oh, okay.
Thank you so much. I just want, before I make my final comments, I just wanted to say the question about hip hop to you, Frederick, was, it wasn't from Felix Mutunga, it was from Rogers. I'm not sure what Rogers' last name is because I'm not seeing it on my screen, but I just thought I should make that correction. Felix merely forwarded the question to me because I couldn't find it. Having said that, I don't know how other people feel, but this has been amazing for me. I wish I could feel this way about all conferences. You know, the fact that I'm sitting here, I didn't get up to go and grab a cup of coffee and I'm not dozing off says a lot. This was truly refreshing. It was rich. There was tremendous information, and I really appreciate the frankness, you know, how candid all the presenters were, aside for just being brilliant. So thank you so much. I really look forward to having more of these discussions. When we talk about the African continent and the African diaspora, many times we talk about our great histories, our great natural resources, our great human resources, our great achievements in the arts, in science, in sports, and in so many other areas. But for me, none of this will make sense if we don't come together and have a common voice. And I'm just excited by the fact that there are programs like this that are trying so hard, and I believe are being successful in bringing us together. My experience with people from the Caribbean, from other African countries, African Americans, has been remarkable. I don't know what my life would be without all these brothers and sisters within the continent and around the world. I do appreciate the opportunity to do this. I've never done this before, so thank God for helping me. And I do appreciate the African Studies Center, Upenyu, and everybody else who felt that, you know, I could be a part of this. It's been a wonderful experience. And at this point, I'll just defer to Upenyu to make final comments.
Thank you, Philip. I don't have final points. You have said it very, very well. The only one thing I want to say is if you are like me and you would like to continue this conversation, the African Studies program at UW-Madison has set up an event on Monday, July 13, where we can continue to reflect and to talk about the themes that came up from this conversation. I put the link to that event in the chat box, and you can also just go to the African Studies program website. You'll be able to get to that link. We look forward to having you on Monday to continue this conversation. Thank you so much. And back to Adam.
Hey, thank you so much, Upenyu, and I hope I'm not going to break up now. But I just want to say thank you to all of you. It was so wonderful. This session was amazing. Just to see the passion, the diversity of voices, and just this panel you brought together, as Philip has said, is so rich, so diverse, and I think we all enjoyed it immensely. I think we all took a lot out of it, and I think I definitely want to come to your follow-up events. So, and I imagine everyone else here will too. So thank you for approaching us for it, and thank you for just putting this on for us, because I think it's really been a very special session. And I think I think going forward, I definitely would love to do more work with you guys in this capacity. Just from our side, I'm just going to just give you, because I wanted to speak earlier, in terms of welcome to those of you who haven't been to our webinars before, but just let me say this was our fourth webinar in the series. And as you'll see, it's a very diverse series. We look at issues of African diaspora from various perspectives. We look at it from the arts and culture side, we look at it from the political side. So very much a diverse range of fields. And what's going to be next, what we're having our next webinar, we're going to be taking a break for the rest of July. We'll be back in early August, the 6th of August. And that webinar is going to focus on a subject that is essentially part of all of our lives at the moment, and that is the issue of health. COVID-19, okay, which I don't think is unfamiliar to anyone here. What we'll be doing is we're having two specific papers in that webinar. The first will be focusing on the building health policy and population and looks at health management. and the education of students, sorry, let me just, yeah, so it's issues of health policy and population, focusing specifically on the perspective of 2 African doctors working in the United States. And then the other one is going to be talking about the impact of COVID-19 in compounding the racist and personal authenticity challenges faced by diasporic African communities. So both very relevant for this moment in time, and for that webinar, we'll give you more details closer to the time. Like we've done with this one, an invitation will be sent out with a link. You'll register, and information about the webinar itself will be up on our website as well. And so just, our speakers are coming from Louisiana State University and University of Nigeria. So again, a diversity of speakers there. In terms of the other webinars we've had so far, and I saw a question coming up in the comments about this as well. We have just updated our website with the last 3 videos of the past webinars. This webinar will also be up on that website as well. I will send the link, it's in the email that you received, but I should put it, if you stay a little longer, I'll put the link down here as well. And just for this post will be up, this video will be up in the next week or so. I will notify you when it's up. I can send an email out to everyone that's here and let them know. We also have a YouTube channel, which you will link to when you go to the YouTube videos, which has, besides our webinars, has all our other different events. We have had a digital diplomacy event. We've had a specific event on George Floyd and the significance of George Floyd within Africa as a figure. So I definitely suggest checking that one out. And I think that's it. So we look forward to seeing you again in August. This series will go until September. So there's plenty more to that, plenty more to see and plenty more sessions. So please do join us again. And just thank you again to Upenyu, thank you to Philip, thank you to your wonderful panelists, because really this has been a very special event. And as I've said before, I really hope to work with you guys again, because it really, and thank you also to Michigan State, who've been a wonderful partner to us throughout this whole series. So thank you. Thank you all. I will just drop the link quickly, just so you can see in terms of our past webinars. Just give me a second. Okay. Seem to have frozen here a bit. Okay, hold on. I can't. Okay. Sorry, it's my own computer, but I will forward it to you when I have that connection. Okay. Thank you so much, everyone. And stay safe. Stay safe and stay well.
Safe.
Thanks very much. Bye.